Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear here, and today we're going to talk about the top 10 obsolete evolutionary arguments. Doug has put down a list, and these are some pretty good ones. Most of them I'm familiar with, but there's one I wasn't, and until he kind of refreshed my memory. So, Doug, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Well, I wanted to first of all go back to the time of Charles Lyell. And I think that some of the impressions that he put out had very long-lasting negative effects on a lot of people.
For those who are not familiar with Charles Lyell, he wrote Principles of Geology, 1830?
Something.
Yeah, and that was where the long-age geology really got codified and standardized in so many respects. So he was definitely not a biblical guy at all, and wanted to.
He wanted to free the free science from the laws of Moses.
From the laws of Moses, yeah.
And that's
and one of the things he picked on was Niagara Falls, and it was the erosion, right, Doug?
Yeah, he measured. Or I actually talked with locals there about how the falls was eroding the canyon there, and he determined that it was about a foot a year. Well, it's actually about 3 foot a year or 4 foot a year.
Wow, yeah.
Who you talk to?
Yeah.
He talked to the locals and everybody, and. What the locals was telling him was different than what he was really the results he was expecting, and so he modified the data to fit his theory.
Yeah.
And so they came up with the idea that the falls were about 11,000 years old, based upon how far back it had eroded from the original Niagara escarpment.
Yeah, and we know, actually, in modern days, we saw how it was eroding so much faster. About 20, 25 years ago, they had to shore it up with concrete thing. They actually stopped Niagara Falls back because it was eroding so fast. Definitely the falls are not 10,000 or 11,000 years old. I don't know, what do you think? Probably, obviously, post-Noatian flood, I guess. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, that's something that I would... say that you can date it to the flood, time of the flood, when the falls started to erode, and
which is still a good long time, but it's about 4,500 years ago, as opposed to 11,000. Some of the Lyell's theories, I mean, he's the one that started getting where you got millions of years, so in the scheme of things, it's not as bad, but. You know what? I don't want to give him an inch because evolutionists will take a mile.
But this is where it started, was with this. This thing, and he developed his other millions of years stuff a little bit later than that.
Right.
And so he started talking about an ice age, and the recent. Started classifying the layers of rock according to the fossils that are found in them, and so he. That's where a lot of that theology came.
It was interesting, Doug, because not to belabor the point, but I have a book called the Devonian Controversy, which is in the 1809 that book was published. So these theories are not original to Lyell. In fact, a guy named James Hutton proposed some of that stuff back in the late 1700s. And so it had been progressing this way, but his book, Principles of Geology, really... it was a landmark book, and it changed a lot of people's thinking about the age of the Earth, and of course that predicated or precipitated the ability for Darwin's theory to take root, because you never had enough time to see any evolutionary changes. So if we have millions of years, that's where that all come from.
His motivation was to subtly discredit the Bible.
Yep. It was,
and it was quite effective in doing so. And you had Charles Darwin picked up the book while he was on the Beagle voyage.
Yep.
And I think that was really where he started to change his mind about God and the Bible. He wanted to do something for the Fuegans. He thought that these people were so primitive that they couldn't have been of the line of Adam and Eve, and
Yeah.
so they, that was one of the beginnings of the pre-Adamite idea, the idea that monkeys evolved into men, and you have a lot of that type of thinking went on at that time, trying to figure out and explore why
Well,
people look different, you know.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, they're using things, external things, to try to prop up a theory to rebel against the Creator, rebel against the biblical worldview. It's a cascading effect of deception, and this is what happens. You have one thing comes in, and to that, what's interesting though is I kind of laugh a little bit. I think of Psalm chapter 2. Why the nations rage and the Lord laughs from His throne, because they think that they're knocking down this house of cards of biblical theology, but in reality, the house of cards is theirs.
That's
And it's
right.
become very obvious as we talk about these just 10 different points here. The biblical text stands, no matter with all the assaults and attacks upon it, scientifically and every different way you can think about. It continues to hold up. I still think that the idea with Voltaire, that says, well, when I die, my books will eclipse the Bible in 50 years. Well, in less than 50 years, his house was a Bible publishing, home of a Bible publishing society. I don't know if it still is or not, but that was pretty interesting.
I don't know if that story is true or not.
Oh no, really? Okay, I've read that for years.
But
Yeah.
we need to make sure we got our facts straight, because I've heard both sides of that.
Because I read that in a fairly, well, it doesn't really matter. The point of it is, what is still true is his books are virtually forgotten today, and the Bible is not. Okay, and so anyway,
And so you have, we've got sort of a whole mixture of things that we're going to throw out there that are obsolete evolutionary arguments. I wanted to talk about one that I was reading about just recently on creation.com. I think it is creation.com that had this, where they were talking about nylon eating bacteria.
now, this is the new one. Yeah.
Well, it's not new to me.
No,
but
it was
it's
new to me.
about-
I had not heard this before.
And what the argument is that nylon is something man-made.
Yep.
It's artificial.
And fairly recent
And so if you have bacteria that eats it, then what it means is that it would have evolved that capability, because it's not a natural type of thing. Well, actually it is. It's an organic compound, and it's a polymer.
Okay.
And when they were having the manufacturing plants that produce nylon, what they used for this experiment, this is what I was reading about in this article, they were using the waste products from the nylon manufacturing.
All right.
And so it was that stuff that they were using in their experiments. And
Okay.
it wasn't the nylon itself. It was the waste products. Now, if you have nylon today, you don't see it deteriorating on your body if you're wearing it, nylon
No.
stockings.
No.
And so the bacteria that's eating it is actually eating the shorter strands of polymers that were in this slurry of stuff. That was what the original experiment.
Well, the thing about even nylon, though it's a fairly new product,
Right.
but like you alluded to it earlier, it's made out of organic compounds.
Yeah.
It'd be like similar to me is like you get this bacteria, or I think it's a bacteria, something when you have oil spills and they can go in and
Right, yeah.
and it can eat all the oil or clean it all up because it's a naturally occurring thing. Even when we synthesize things, we're still using products that are found in the Earth's environment. Plastic is made out of oil, so it wouldn't surprise me if something could eat plastic. Probably there is something that you get right down to it.
Yeah.
So why would nylon? I guess that never really a thought. But then
It's a very poor argument in
I think
the
it
first
is.
place. But what it does is gives you an impression that these capabilities somehow
Suddenly materialized.
materialized without the help of God.
Yeah.
And God couldn't have had a hand in that. Well, there was. I was also reading that there was an expedition that took place in like the 1840s or something like that, where they were trying to find the Northwest Passage.
I know
It
this.
was a
Yeah.
Franklin expedition,
Yep.
and they were shipwrecked, and some of them were actually buried in the permafrost.
Yes, and when they dug them up, their eyes were still intact.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was bizarre. That would freak me out.
And so they actually gotten samples from these people and found nylon-eating bacteria in these samples. So
So the
this
bacteria-
was before so the bacteria had the capability even before this experiment was done. So it's not something that evolved. It's something that the Creator put into his creation to take care of waste products. And if it wasn't for bacteria doing its job and deteriorating things, we'd have garbage all over.
We'd have garbage up the yin yang everywhere. But all right, Doug, this is one of my favorite ones. The next one, junk DNA.
Yeah.
People now are beginning to realize, except maybe the layman who's been propagandized. But I think some maybe news people still, if they're promoting it, I don't know. But most of the scientists realize that there is no such thing as junk DNA. There is non-protein coding DNA. And that's what they used to call junk DNA. They figured it was vestigial holdovers from before they developed their protein coding, to what they're doing. But
they're starting to understand what it is.
A little bit more about what it is. There's some things that have you
Well, it's sort of like a whole bunch of the different subroutines of stuff. It's a special coding to regulate how things
Right.
are made. And
Yeah.
so it's sort of like the operating system background, the foundation of how the DNA code actually works.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And so the whole DNA molecule is a four-dimensional computer code.
I know.
And the fourth dimension, of course, is time, because it changes and it adapts and
And it does it beforehand. It
Right.
does it. It anticipates.
And so it's a dynamic thing, something that changes with time, and because of that, it's a very complicated molecule. Each three-dimensional aspect of the DNA molecule has a meaning. The three-dimensional code of the proteins fold up in a certain mechanism into a kind of a ball, and it's the way that they fold up that brings the activity of what it does.
Well, I guess what fascinates me, Doug, is the fact that the term junk DNA, again, was an evolutionary prediction. It makes sense, Doug. Look, you talk about computer code. Remember back 20 years ago when everybody was worried about the numbers that weren't going to be right for 2000 to 2001 or 1999. And then when there's all these earlier languages like COBOL or whatever, or BASIC or all these things, and a lot of these have to be redone or they're holdovers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from, by the way, intelligent design.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? But in the DNA, there's no genetic holdovers that are basically flotsam and jetsam and basically waste material. They all have a function. We don't know what all of them are, but they continue to keep finding things out about them. I like that idea that it's a backup system. Some of these supposed junk DNAs are backup systems. They're like we have systems in the gross morphological part of our bodies that are backup systems, that are redundancies built in.
Right.
And that's good design work. You got redundancies built in so that to back things up. And junk DNA, in some of these at least, seems to serve that same kind of a function as backup in case something goes wrong, or it helps set up something so it doesn't go squirrely on
like
you.
for example, if you have a mutation
Yeah.
There's a mechanism in the genome that would fix the mutation. And I was even in my chemistry class, which was done 50 years ago, or
Wow.
almost, but they knew that you had a mechanism where two different thymines in the DNA molecule are together. Sometimes with ultraviolet light, they'll bond together.
Okay.
And that forms something that there's a mechanism that fixes that, and it'll take those two thymines out and replace them with the new thymines that aren't bound together.
Aren't bound together. Okay.
And so there's a mechanism, just to it's sort of like having automated truck fixing process when you run into a mechanical problem. And then what happens also is that, like, if there's not the right nutrients available or something where you couldn't repair the thymines, there's a backup mechanism that actually does the repair.
Is that right?
Secondary mechanism. And so it's the secondary mechanism that could introduce a different nucleotide in there and cause the mutation.
Now,
But it doesn't. But to have it actually fixate in the and be inheritable is another mechanism, because it's sort of like if you're reading a sentence and somebody misspelled a word.
Right.
You can still understand what the
Sure.
context from the context, and that's what happens. Why, though we're full of mutations and
we still function.
we still function. It's because that's when the mutation load gets too heavy. That's when we die.
Yeah. Or we have genetic defects, which sometimes overrides things.
Right.
Well, Doug, let's go on to the next one. This is a good one, and now you've done some research on this. But the idea, the theory that we're 99% related to the chimpanzee genetically.
Yeah, and when I learned about the mechanism that became used to come up with that conclusion, I was appalled.
Yeah, it's bad. It's not only bad science. It's not science. It's wow.
Well, what they did to get this conclusion was that they took the I think it was in the human genome that they used as a scaffold.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and then they sliced and diced this chimp DNA into little short pieces, and then wherever they could find where it matched on the human genome, they put it together. And so they were able to piece it together so they could get 99% of it.
I'm surprised they didn't get 100%, because the fact of the matter is, everything's made up of DNA anyway in living organisms.
Yeah.
So if you want to plug it in wherever you want to plug it into,
So it's sort of like taking the Harry Potter book and then a textbook on biochemistry, and taking the words out.
taking the words out, yep.
And then
Yeah.
pasting it there, and they're 99% similar.
99% Harry Potter is a science textbook, yeah. Because the placement, and that gets to the issue, placement of where these things go is a big part of it, Doug. Not only that, are there inversions, or are there things where they get they're backward and
Yeah, well, if it doesn't work the one way, they switch it around.
flip it back. I mean, this is ridiculous. That is appalling, Doug. That's amazing, Doug.
And so there are similarities, okay, and but even if you take the fact that the chimpanzee has one more chromosome than we do.
Wait, they're more evolved than we are? Well, Doug, we've talked about this before in the past, that when you have we have an environment, an ecosystem, where chimpanzees, crocodiles, birds, humans, we breathe the same air.
Mm-hmm.
We eat many of the same kinds of foods.
Mm-hmm.
Might be carnivorous, but it might be plants, whatever it is. Anyway, what I was saying is that we have a lot of similarities just in the ecosystem that we have to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that some of the design work would be some of the, when you talk about some similarities between a chimp and, well, there's similarities between a crocodile, there's similarities between a rat
And a banana.
and a banana, and so, because we all use many of the items from this ecosystem, air, water, food, and those kinds of things, would alone show up some similarities. But the idea that we're 99% is really, what really gets me, Doug, and I've talked this before on different shows, in the same breath, they're talking about how we're 99% close to chimp, and then they try to make a big deal about how different than we are than Neanderthal men.
Right, yeah.
Well, which one is it?
Mm-hmm.
Are we way different than Neanderthal men, which we're not, okay? Or are we the same as chimps? Because chimpanzees are definitely much different than either a Neanderthal or a human being, and yet they do or Homo erectus Cro-Magnon, any of these, okay? These precursors supposedly to human beings, and so I've always been. They talk out of both sides of the mouth, Doug.
Mm-hmm.
They say, "Whoa, we're way different." Yet this is way closer to us than any chimpanzee, and then they'll say chimpanzee. They're real close to us.
Have you ever noticed,
So, yeah.
though, that it's usually in September when school starts that they find a new ape man?
A new ape man, yeah.
And the National Geographic will come out with it, and there it is.
Well, they're about as credible as a $3 bill, especially after their Archaeoraptor debacle when they, the fraudulent bird dinosaur thing. All right, Doug. What about the cock?
Talk about feathered dinosaurs while we're at it there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I jumped ahead. I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but we have one before that. But let's talk about the feathered dinosaurs. It relates to that, okay?
Yeah, and there's you find the fossils. There's about 4 or 5 of them in museums, okay?
Right.
Where it shows the imprint of feathers, and yet there's certain characteristics of them that appear to be dinosaurs.
Seem reptilian, or
Reptilian.
Yeah.
Well, who cares? Well, what do you think? It's another created being.
It's another creature. It's like when the big one with the Archaeopteryx. That was the big one, but the idea that they could transition from scales to feathers or whatever it is, is that they're so completely and utterly different. Well, even there's a scientist, he's an evolutionary guy, I think, for Fiducia. He mocks this whole bird, or I don't know if he's still alive. He's been
around.
I think he's still around, but he talked about this is going to be the biggest debacle. But it was interesting, Doug. Huxley talked about this years back in the 1890s, and he was using gross morphological things to try to produce a link between a dinosaur and a bird way back then. Yeah. And now they're doing. It's like they've gone. Everything that goes around comes around. They're talking about the same kinds of things, Doug.
Well, let's just think about it. What the self-respecting reptile would climb a tree and start jumping from branch to branch, hoping to fly? There's either something works or it doesn't.
It doesn't work, right? Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not going to spend much more time on that. The other one I saw was the coccyx bone. It was the vestigial, and that's the tailbone.
Yeah.
I just read an article about that. That's an anchor for all the muscles in your butt. Okay. Yeah. And so if you had that surgically removed, all right, evolutionists, if it's useless, why don't you volunteer for that surgery? You will be wearing Depends all the rest of your life.
Yeah.
All right. So that argument is really silly. The other argument I find very silly is they call us flat earthers, and that's equivocating something that's not us to something that is easy to a straw man to knock down. So we're not flat earthers. There's no reason to.
In fact, the biblical record talks about the sphere of the earth.
Right, yeah.
In Isaiah, and it floats upon nothing. That's a biblical text. Ancient man, believe it or not, actually knew that the earth was spherical as well. They even measured some of the curve, some of those ancient mathematicians. All right, Doug, what do we got?
Natural selection.
Natural selection.
Natural selection is really something that is very difficult to prove. It's something that's and to say that it was something that subtracts from the genome will add new features to the genome.
Yeah, that's the old thing about yeah. Well, we're going to lose a little money on every transaction, but we're going to make it up in volume.
Right. Yeah.
No, you're just going to lose a lot of money. Same thing with genetic material, because that's natural select. Because we don't, as creationists, we really don't have a lot of problem. You can't really prove it, but it seems obvious that certain things speciated and went out and did things, but it's all a recombination of what was already there or deleting, and that's what happens. And so
and it's a little bit different.
It doesn't produce anything new.
There's a lot of effects of epigenetics where things are turned on and turned off, and that's by purpose.
Yes, it's built into the genome. In certain environments to trigger things on and off. Well, we can kind of get into that with carcinogens in a negative fashion. You do certain things, it's going to cause problems, and because it turns on a thing that will actually cause cancer or something. That's a kind of an epigenetic thing.
So two more, and very quickly.
Okay.
The age of caves. If you go to Carlsbad Caverns, they used to have a sign there saying millions
I remember
of years. Then somebody pointed out that this gypsum stuff really can happen fast, and so they reduced it down to a mountain. And finally, the sign's gone.
The sign's gone. Yeah. Yep. I haven't seen the area now, but it's been a long time since I've been to Carlsbad. Yep. So.
The whole biogenic law that Haeckel brought out was about gill slits. And ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So the way that the embryo develops recapitulates the way that evolution happens.
The entire evolutionary cycle. That's been proven to be a myth.
And we know that argument is it was disproved back then. It's still finding.
And it's still false today.
You still find it in textbooks, but it shouldn't be there. And that's something that bothers me is that. People don't bother to, they'll take what they learn in school, but don't bother to actually check it out and test it for themselves. And, you always talk about science being observable, testable, and repeatable, but how many times does anybody repeat an experiment? And many of the things that are evolutionary are something you can't test or look at or figure out.
Yep.
So anyway, I think that
kind of a whirlwind, Doug.
Knock these off. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. God bless you. We'll talk to you later.